Okay, not much for me to do for you here, but to remind you about some of the reciprocal functions. So hopefully you have your calculator handy. The one thing that I would suggest is to double check, make sure you are set to degrees or radians, depending on the problem. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, so we are going to do that by hitting the mode button, which is right next to the second button, down arrow to highlight either degree or radian, depending on what we're talking about. And then you want to make sure that you hit enter so you lock that in. Okay, and we're just going to go ahead and highlight that here. Oops. Seriously. So you remember. Okay. So cosecant. Cosecant is 1 over sine. So what you are plugging into the calculator is 1 over sine, 25 degrees. Make sure you are set to degrees. We're going to round to 3 decimal places. That's what it asks for. I got 2.36620, so 2.366. Secant, we've got 1 over cosine of negative 125 degrees. Okay, we plug that in. We get a negative 1.743. Cotangent, 1 over tangent of 180, which your calculator will do for you. Unfortunately, the tangent of 180 is 0, so when you try to do this, you get an error. This is undefined. Secant, 1 over cosine. Same thing, cosine of pi over 2 is 0. So this one is also undefined. Cosecant, 1 over sine. You need to make sure that your calculator is changed to radians. This 3 pi over 5, that's in radians. So if you have not done that yet, make sure you change this to radians. We get 1 over the sine of 3 pi over 5. Make sure you close that parenthesis. We're getting the right numbers. We get 1.051. Secant is 1 over cosine of 3 pi over 8. And we get 2.613. Cotangent, 1 over the tangent of negative 360, which is the same as positive 360, which is the same as 0 degrees. There, the cosine is 1, the sine is 0. So cotangent, cosine over sine, or the 1 over tangent, we're going to get undefined here again. Hopefully you remember to switch back to degrees. And our last one here, h, secant is 1 over cosine. When we plug that into the calculator, we get 2.067. And that is it for these, okay? Inverse secant, cosecant, and tangent. So same as what we did before. Is that even a sentence? We did this a while ago. We want these angles in degrees. Please make sure that calculator is set to degrees. Here's how I like to think of these. Cosecant is 1 over sine. So I want the 1 over the sine of theta to be negative 3.6, which means we can invert both sides. Sine of theta is 1 over negative 3.6. We undo sine by using inverse sine, so our theta is going to be the inverse sine of 1 over negative 3.6, or negative 1 over 3.6. And what we get here is 16.13 degrees. It did say 2 decimal places, so I want to make sure that I do that. Secant 1 over cosine of theta is negative 0.987. Cosine of theta then is negative 1 over 0.987. Theta, inverse cosine of negative 1 over 0.987, and we get an error. So this one is undefined, and we will talk about that a little bit more in the next couple of pages. Trust your calculator. Cotangent of t is 2, so I got 1 over tangent of t is 2. The tangent of t is 1 over 2. T then is inverse tangent of 1 over 2. And we get 26.57 degrees. D, secant is 1 over cosine. So I got 1 over cosine theta is 120, which seems weird until we do this. Cosine of theta is 1 over 120. That feels a little better. Theta then is inverse cosine of 1 over 120. And we get 89.52 degrees. Cotangent, 1 over tangent of theta is 5.875. That means the tangent of theta is 1 over 5.875. Theta then is the inverse tangent of that 1 over 5.875, and we get 9.66 degrees. Always a little unsettling to get those degree measures in the single digits. We just don't see that too often. Perfectly okay. Cosecant is 1 over sine. So I've got the 1 over sine of t is negative 2. Sine of t is negative 1/2. That should seem familiar because we have seen that on the unit circle. So this is basically saying what's the angle where the sine is negative 1/2. And even though that happens a couple of places on the unit circle, this is a function, so we should only have one answer. So f, the inverse sine of negative 1/2, is negative 30 degrees. And there's page 11.